Welcome to Tea Time History Chat Live. Today we're going to talk about King John because it is 807 years since he died. It's quite a long time ago, but he had an everlasting impact for somebody who was really one of the most inept kings and monarchs of this country. We all know his name, so let's have a chat about him anyway, because it is 870 years ago today that he died. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me. If you're joining me live, I'm streaming live on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube, but also if you are watching on the catch up or you are listening on the podcast, a very warm welcome to you too. Thank you very much for your support. Please like this video, do hearts, share it with your friends if you think they're interested. And I hope you can hear me on YouTube. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you did get all of that. But basically, today is going to be about King John. If you are on the catch up and you want to scrub to the King John bit, please do miss the first few minutes because I do have some other stuff I want to chat to you about before we go on with that. Also, I want to say hello to everyone. So hello, I can see Anaga, Jonathan, Elena, Dorothy. Who else have we got? Sorry, everybody on Instagram. They go Jinsag from Bourbon. I can see loads of people joining. Sorry, on Instagram, I do lose them quite the comments quite quickly. So welcome. So King John. So we're going to be going back to the 12th and early 13th century. So, and also what I must say is this is a right. Can I just say there's going to be no political talk or anything in the chat. We're just talking history today. So no apologies for not getting off track. Dorothy doesn't want to script to any of John's middly bits or leggy bits. Indeed. Well, this isn't History After Dark, but yeah, we will be discussing John. We did do a episode on History After Dark about King John, so you can look that up as well. He scored very highly in the History After Dark Deceased Gits League, which is almost coming to a close. You can meet us tonight. We're live tonight at 8:30, slightly later tonight than usual because because actually I have to go up to my daughter's school till 8 o'clock. So that's why. Thank you, Joanne. Really lovely to have you here. So yes, a History After Dark tonight. We will be discussing now that okay, we got to X. And we did some incredible linguistic and mental gymnastics to get to the candidate for tonight, which is we got to Crossbones Cemetery, which is in Southwark, part of the Liberty of the Clink. Anyway, we'll explain all tonight, but basically we're going to be doing the Bishops of Winchester and Crossbones Cemetery. So join us tonight if you are around for History After Dark. It's 8:30, history.after.dark on Instagram, History After Dark on YouTube. But anyway, so what else would I want to say? Yes, please do give it a thumbs up and hearts on Instagram and all of that kind of malarkey. I would like to give a shout out to Melanie. She's joined my Patreon this week, and that is my preferred way if you want to support me, that you do, because I get to give you so much back, including membership of book club, which we're voting at the moment on which books we're going to be reading next year, so in 2024. And we have our current book is The Sisters Who Would Be Queen by Leander Delisle, and we are meeting on the 12th of November. If you haven't read that book, or you don't think you've got time to get through it all before that meeting, but you would like to come along, don't worry. Lots of people come along to their first meeting before they've read the book, just to see how it goes. So you are more than welcome at all times to join my Patreon. I love having people there. We've got a lovely little community going. Colleen, good morning. Dorothy, yeah, Jonathan Knox had already been done for K. X was a stretch. Yeah, do you know, I never even thought about doing Knox for X. So very, very, very good. Elena, hi everyone. So Was that all? Was that all my announcements? Oh, I do have, if you're interested in coming on tour with me, I do have an announcement about that, but I'll leave that till later so that we can get into the crux of what we're here to talk about today. I've got some spaces that have come up for a tour that was fully booked. So if you're thinking you couldn't come to the May and Berlin tour, then actually you may well be able to. So yeah, let's talk about King John. Well, he certainly wasn't boring, that's for sure. So let's give him a bit of context. What I'll also say is at the end, I will give you 3 books that I would recommend you read if you want to know more about King John and about the period in which he lived. But anyway, so bearing in mind that it is it's a complex period, but let's go for it. It's incredibly interesting. So John, he was born actually on Christmas Eve, 24th of December 1166 at Oxford, and he was the son of Henry II and his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine. He was the 4th and youngest surviving son. So ahead of him in the family tree, in the just grabbing my tea, in the line of succession were 3 elder brothers. You had Henry, another Henry, obviously named after his father, Richard, who we would know better as Richard the Lionheart, and Geoffrey. And then you had John. Now, Henry II managed to fall out with all his sons at some point, and his wife. And this is mainly down to him. He just would not relinquish any power. So his sons are brought up as, warriors, as knights. This is a very interesting period where the concept of what it was to be a knight and knighthood and chivalry and all this is developing. It's very very interesting, and I've got a book which is fantastic for going through how that all developed, because we all everything has to have started somewhere, but the idea of chivalry and being a knight and everything, I kind of always felt like it went back so far, but where did it start? Well, it starts around this period. And anyway, so I will give you a book that's great to go through that at the end. Sorry, I'm going to be sipping my tea today because I'm getting a bit croaky. So they're raised for their job, but they're not given any actual responsibility. And of course, Eleanor, I mean, could do a whole thing on Eleanor of Aquitaine. She is actually a ruler in her own right as the Duchess of Brittany. Duchess, is that what they called them? And she hello, Amanda. Finally caught alive. You haven't missed anything really, just the introduction. We're talking about King John because it's well, why not? It's 807 years since he died today, so let's do a little look at him and just putting him into context. His father's Henry II. He's the 4th surviving son. I think there was another son who died at around 3 years old, but by the time he's born, he's the 4th son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Both very interesting characters in their own right. Eleanor of Aquitaine, incredibly powerful woman, considered in Brittany, in Aquitaine, not Brittany, obviously. In Aquitaine, she is considered, their ruler, and Henry II is via his wife there. She wants her sons to take the power that they should. Now, what Henry II would do is bestow castles and lands on his sons. So his sons are, like I said earlier, Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and then John is the youngest. But by the time John is born, so he's born 24th of December 1166. Sorry, when he's 4 years old. So only when he's small. His eldest brother Henry is crowned in kind of uh, a ceremony that has since long fallen out of, I suppose, in favour of crowning or being created Prince of Wales in England. But the idea is, and it was an older idea, the Atheling idea, heir to the throne, recognised heir to the throne. So Henry the Young King, you may have heard of, that is Henry II's eldest son, Henry the Young King. And he is promised by his father all these, lands and responsibilities. And then Henry is never forthcoming in actually giving these to his son. And he's the same with his other two sons as well, Richard and Geoffrey. John, like I say, is only small at the time that his elder brother Henry is crowned Henry the Young King. Now, at that point, Henry is promised, I'm going to look at my notes, Normandy and Anjou. Richard is appointed Count of Poitou. I'm so sorry about my French. And has control of Aquitaine obviously via his mother. And Geoffrey is promised, well, he becomes Duke of Brittany. But like I said, these are all sort of titles, and Henry doesn't want to relinquish any of the actual, like Manda says, I feel like Henry created most of his own problems. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We all know that people without a purpose generally, it's not good. It's not good. And they could have been such a strong team. It feels like a big shame. But this is at the point where he jokingly refers to, and it's come down to us as John as Lackland. He used the French for it, which I can't remember at the moment. But yeah, so he's jokingly nicknamed Lackland because he's 4 years old and he hasn't bestowed any land on him at this point. Don't know what he thought would happen in the future, if he's already carved it out in between the other three. But anyway, we shall see. So yeah, because he has this tight control of power, the relationship he has with his sons and with his wife becomes very strained. And he's sowing the seeds of rebellion because he's creating schisms within his own family. So of course, as soon as there's something, let's put this into context. Henry II, I don't want to forget this bit because this is key. Henry II is the king who will you rid me? Someone rid me of this troublesome priest, talking about Becket. So Thomas Becket is murdered, supposedly, reportedly, possibly, on the orders of Henry II. He's murdered in 1170. End of December 1170. He is made a saint. I think it's within 3 years. I can't see where that is on my notes, but I think it's within 3 years. He slight tangent, but with Thomas Becket, he was sort of not very. He wasn't as popular in life as he was in death, which actually I think goes for quite a few people. And the cult's not the right word, but grew up around him, and pilgrims almost immediately start coming to the site of his martyrdom, and his and a shrine is the shrine's created after he's made a saint, but miracles are being reported and etc. So the cult of Thomas Becket is strong, and he's been murdered by Henry II's knights. So Henry II has a massive uphill struggle in terms of PR. Back this up with the fact that he's already creating these divisions between himself and his sons, and you sow the seeds of a rebellion, and that surfaced in 1173. So our John is still a child at this point, but his 3 elder brothers rise up against his father. Their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, is in support of her sons against her really estranged husband by this point. Um, the 3 sons have the backing of the French and the Scots. They're backing who they think will be the winner in exchange for promises of land and titles, etc. If and when Henry, the young king, already crowned, already recognized as the next in line, if he wins, they get all this. Now, Henry II is an incredible warrior, has to be said, and he manages to put down this this rebellion. So the rebellion, starts in 1173, April 1173. In July 1174, he decides maybe this is God's punishment for his role in the murder of Thomas Becket. And when he returns to England from fighting over in Normandy, the first thing he does pretty much is go to Canterbury and do penance at the shrine of Thomas Becket, as it was at the time. Now, that atonement appeared to do the trick. At least in his eyes, it did the trick, because then a band of his men loyal to him managed to capture the King of Scotland, who, remember, is supporting Henry's sons in their rebellion against him. They managed to catch the King of Scotland, called William the Lion. There's lots of lions around this time. And that sets in motion a sort of domino effect. And Henry basically goes around and sweeps up submissions and surrenders from the rest of the country after that. So after 18 months of fighting him, his sons come back to him, tail between their legs, hands up, Dad, you won, sort of thing. Now, John, so he would have been 6 or 7 at the time, spends all of that conflict at his father's side. His mother, by the way, is in captivity, because that's what Henry II did to Eleanor when he found out that she was in support of her sons. So John spent all this time of the rebellion next to his father, Henry II. And I suppose, not unsurprisingly, he becomes Henry's favourite child. I mean, it's not a great competition, is it? Or the other 3 have risen up against their father. So for John to be the favourite, I think, is maybe overstating or overassuming the closeness of the relationship. However, it will be shown later, Henry did have an affection. He thought, right, I've lost my eldest 3. I can't really trust them anymore. I don't know about their loyalty, but at least I've got my little boy John. Well, we shall see. So one of the things that came from that is John was no longer Lackland, because his father started to give him lands. Now, as I said, they're already ascribed to someone else. So, of course, this causes issues as well. So, he's actually made Henry dismisses his Lord of Ireland, a man called William Fitzaldhelm, and he gave that position to John. John's only 10 years old. So Amanda says, would John have spent much time with his mother? That's a very good question. I'm not sure. Perhaps when he was very young, but they have lands everywhere. Certainly by this point, I think, no, she's on the continent and John's here. I think. He's certainly with his father anyway. Now, there's then more infighting between the brothers this time. So Henry the Young King fights against Richard, his brother Richard, in 1183 over over England and Normandy and Aquitaine, and how that's going to be ruled. Henry II moves in support of Richard, and then Henry the Young King, before anything else can happen, actually dies of dysentery. Awful way to go. So that means the plans for the succession have to be re-looked at anyway. So Richard then becomes Henry II's heir. So he's going to be his heir in terms of being made King of England. Again, though, without any actual power until Henry II actually dies. Henry II does not seem to learn from this. It's an obey me. But that meant that this shuffle around means that Geoffrey would then retain Brittany, and John would now become the Duke of Aquitaine in place of Richard. Richard doesn't want to give up Aquitaine, though. So then they fight again. So Henry II fights with Richard this time to forcibly take the duchy, and he takes Geoffrey on his side. And of course, he's doing it for John. So you just have these. The war ends in a kind of stalemate. I mean, Henry II's giving out these lands and these positions, but he's not giving out much of the power with it anyway. And so there's again this tense sort of family reunion sort of thing at the end of 1184. But then Geoffrey dies. We're at a tournament, and so you now only have Richard left and John. So you only have two of the brothers left. And Richard is desperate to go off on crusade. He really wants to go off on crusade, but he doesn't want to go because he thinks that in his absence, his father is going to make John his heir. John is his favourite. John so far hasn't actually done anything to annoy his father. So Richard decides that what he's going to do is make an alliance with the French king, Philip II, and wage war against his own father again. So Richard, who would become known as the Lionheart, just for reference, and King Philip II of France fight a joint campaign against Henry II of England. Henry II doesn't lose many battles, I have to say, in this. And by the summer of 1189, the king has reassured Richard that no, he is the next in line. But actually, during that conflict, John, so this is right at the end, we're coming right to the end of Henry II's life. John sides with his brother Richard when he's fighting against Henry II. Henry II finds this out just before he dies. So he dies heartbroken that he lost the loyalty of all his sons, but at the last moment he lost the loyalty of his favourite son, John. So 1189, Henry II dies, and so Richard the Lionheart becomes king. Now, Richard the Lionheart is still itching to go off on the Third Crusade. This is what he absolutely wants to do, but he doesn't trust his own brother John. He's not sure about his loyalty. He's not sure what he might do while he's away. Well, actually, that wasn't that wasn't a bad call, actually, from Richard. When he did leave, John did try to take power. He tried to push himself into positions of authority, tried to extract money off people. it's a long and drawn out story that we haven't really got time for here. But again, like I say, I'll give you some reading material. I'll give you some homework if you want it. If later on, just so you can get so into this. It's incredible. But Richard is king for 10 years. He's in the country for 6 months. Again, actually, we've covered him as well in one of the History After Dark episodes, if you want to check it out, because he gets captured. Richard does. But anyway, eventually in 1199, excuse me, Richard dies, and so John does become king. So he's the fourth son. He starts off with no lands, but he ends up, through the deaths of his brothers, inheriting the throne. And he's going to be king for 17 years. And during those 17 years, so no one near as long a reign as other people or as other monarchs, but he builds up a reputation that lasts till the present day. So let's talk about John's reputation. What he did, what he didn't do. You'd have thought with the names that echoes down the centuries, that perhaps he was a great warrior, perhaps he was a great advocate of his people, perhaps he was, I don't know, successful on the battlefield. Maybe he is the one who created everlasting peace. Nope. And historians and contemporaries actually seem to be yes, Beverly will get on to Arthur, definitely. He seems to I forgot what I was going to say now, sorry. But yeah, no, oh yes, that's it. Historians and contemporaries seem to agree that he was a terrible, terrible person. He was a terrible leader. He was a terrible statesman. He was a terrible human being. So let's look at a few things now. Historian Mark Morris. This is one of the books I may as well show you now that I was going to recommend. It's literally King John by Mark Morris. Fantastic book. He describes him as a total jerk. So he's done a biography on him. Yeah, sorry, no, I was just looking. So Marie, this is King John. So John of Gaunt is he is a couple of centuries later, not quite a couple of centuries, but he's in the 14th century. Is he born in the 14th century into the 15th century? Carl's book on the Red Prince, John of Gaunt, is fantastic. So yeah, no, we're talking King John. So he was also described. No, I'll come back to that. On his death, he was described wonderfully by Matthew Paris, one of the monks. Anyway, so Amanda says, I wonder how much John's infamy in the modern public consciousness is due to media. So the thing is with John, if there were any particular redeeming features about John, I think he would have had a kind of Richard III style counter culture movement. He doesn't. And it's actually, this is why I'm going to give you recommendations for things to read afterwards if you want to, because what he did over his life, and you just got a taster there of what his brothers and father were like as well. It is not like he was sort of going to come from a nice stable home where he's been shown sort of how to act around people. But the thing was, in an age of chivalry, John showed none. So when, for instance, if prisoners are taken, there is there's a whole sort of I want to say rule book, but I can't think of the word I'm after, but of how those prisoners would be treated, under what circumstances they would be, you know, released, how they would be kept, why they would be taken. And a lot of the times, or in a lot of cases, they're taken, so sons of noble families might be taken in exchange for loyalty. It's collateral, um, for loyalty. Can people not hear me on Instagram? Brian saying there's no sound. Let me know, people, on Instagram. Yeah, kind of a code of conduct. Yeah. So, I mean, chivalry is sort of that. So, yeah, the way he treats prisoners. So, he's one of John's favourite. Oh, thank you. So, some people can hear me, Brian. I don't know. Jins can hear me. Joanne can hear me. Stick up your volume, Brian. I don't know. Yeah, he yeah, it's just you. Sorry, darling. Yeah, sorry, starving to death was one of his favorite ways of dealing with his enemies. And I'm saying enemies, they're not always enemies. These can be people who just haven't complied. There is incredible amount of toing and froing and alliance changing throughout this period, to the point where I have been reading so much in preparation for this. Like, how do I summarize this? And it's like everyone is altering. I say everyone as a, obviously not literally, but to give you an idea, there's so much change in allegiance. Again, I will mention it now, actually, a really good book that I think helps to tell this. There's Dan Jones, the Plantagenets book, by the way, is good for a great overview of this period. But to get into sort of how people were of nobility and obviously royal rank were expected to behave, and when that was broken. I love this book. It's called The Greatest Knight by Thomas Ashbridge, and it's about William Marshall. And William Marshall, who you may know as the Greatest Knight, he served 5 of the monarchs. So he served Henry II, Henry the Young King, Richard the Lionheart, King John, and then King John's son, Henry III. And how he survived that is very, very interesting. Anyway, so that's a recommended. So why don't we tackle Arthur first? So I already mentioned that John had 3 elder brothers. Henry the Young King and Richard the Lionheart died without issue. But Geoffrey had a son called Arthur. And he was Arthur, Duke of Brittany, or became Duke of Brittany. He, again, in this complicated and always, there's always a conflict, it feels. Maybe there is. I haven't charted it on a sort of calendar, but it feels like there's always a conflict in this, and changing of allegiances and etc. Arthur does rise up with the support, or maybe as the figurehead of Philip Augustus of France. I keep wanting to say Spain, not Spain. Spain's not involved at all. France, as his figurehead to rise up against or to fight against John, and Arthur is involved in that. However, when Arthur is he's captured in 1202. When he's captured, he is either 15 or 16 years old. So he's already been knighted, which is by Philip Augustus, which, sort of a rite of passage into adulthood. But clearly he has influential men around him. You could also argue that what choice has he got? John, despite having no heirs at this time, does not really want to make peace with Arthur. So John, so Arthur is captured and John orders his imprisonment. He's kept in very, very poor conditions. Again, the chivalry is missing here with John. And the nobles of Brittany are angered by Arthur's continual incarceration, and they start to attack John's castles and holdings in Brittany. In response to that, Arthur, now stop eating or close your ears if you don't want to hear something gross. John orders for Arthur's eyes to be put out and him to be castrated. The idea being that he would be useless as a leader, and therefore he can't be a figurehead. He can't rise in rebellion himself, but he also can't be a figurehead for anyone else who wants to knock John off. Now the Pope at the time, and I find this incredible, but actually fully don't find it that exceptional either. It sort of says, well, Arthur gets what he deserves. He's been treacherous. He's risen up against his own lord. He's treacherous. He gets his just deserts, whatever they may be. And actually, some in England may have agreed with that point of view, but in France, they certainly didn't. While he still lived, he was he's been basically taken out of the equation by this, but that doesn't stop John this is not proved, but the legend goes that John, I think it was on one Christmas, he was drunk anyway, decides to go and go to where Arthur is. I think they're celebrating it in the same castle, but anyway, he goes and he actually kills Arthur with his own bare hands. And anyone who John knows has supported Arthur is captured, if they are captured, and is taken to Corfe Castle. And of course, John's favourite form of torturous death, starvation. They try and escape, and then when they try and escape, they get put back in, and their food supply is cut off. Horrendous. He doesn't keep that sort of behavior just to his enemies. I think maybe this is a man that either has paid mercenaries, sycophants, or frenemies. So he's a tyrant, and he will do things like demand. With every uprising, he's trying to demand more loyalty by any which way, and he's done loads of things to annoy everyone in his country. One, he's losing the lands in France. He just can't hold on to them. He's rubbish. And for every time he's trying to raise an army and go back and get his lands, he's taxing. He takes he takes a very hands-on approach to the court system, ruling and fining as he goes to extract money out of people. And after one of these rebellions, he's demanding that every noble house, I think it's every noble house, pretty much sends a son or someone as collateral to secure their loyalty to him. And the story goes, and this is according to Roger of Wendover, that when they went to the house of William de Braose, His wife, who's called Matilda, refused to hand over their son to a man who, and this is from the Chronicle, basically murdered his nephew Arthur. For that, it is thought, but they certainly ended up, imprisoned Matilda and her son in Corfe Castle. And you can guess what happened to them there. John orders that they are not fed, and they starve to death together in a cell. It is just horrendous. He oh gosh, I mean, he fell out with the Pope, and the country was under interdict for, I can't remember how many years now. A lot. Have I written that down anywhere? 1205, he disagreed with the Pope. Yeah, over this is, I mean, it's really quite pathetic when you look back, but over the position of who should take up Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope wanted Stephen Langton. John wanted a guy called John de Grey, and that meant that whole argument meant that the country was John was excommunicated, and the country went into an interdict for 6 years. And that means he's not protecting his people. He's not protecting the church. He's not protecting his people. That means that churches were deserted. There was no religious services. You couldn't commit your dead. You couldn't properly bury your dead. And during that 6 years, that 6-year period was another one of John's, another example of John's just cold and psychopathic behaviour. He was, I've written here, John was not only having problems with barons, but the Welsh were were being problematic too. John has problems with everybody. The Welsh weren't wanting to be subjugated to the English, especially this sorry, excuse for a king. And so John, again, to guarantee that they wouldn't rise up against him, has 28 boys taken from Welsh noble families and kept in Nottingham Castle. This is supposed to be, collateral. But again, John doesn't have the chivalry that he should to the rules. The rule book is kind of is ripped up with John. And John's out hunting in Nottingham. Great forests. I mean, because they had them all made for themselves and no one else could go in them. So the forests are great for hunting. John loved it. And John, while he's out hunting, is told that Llewellyn, the Welsh prince Llewellyn, has risen up in rebellion against him. So supposedly without much checking, he rides to Nottingham and gives the order for all of the 28 boys to be hung. Horrendous. And remembering again, this is as well during the interdict, so their souls are also damned. There are other things he did. I mean, I've mentioned about him getting his hands on sort of, he traveled a lot. So that is one thing John did do. He traveled the country a lot. Everywhere you go, there's sort of, King John's hunting lodge or something. Very close to where I am. King John had a hunting lodge. It's gone now, but the surrounding area was again private forest for hunting for him. But he also taxed people. So, he charged the City of London 3,000 marks at the time to reaffirm their liberty. It's something they've already got. He just charges them again for it. He would take huge amounts of inheritance tax. So yeah, he would take a lot in terms of inheritance tax from his nobles. He promised to protect the Jewish community, but in return, as you can guess, for money. And although he takes a keen interest in the judiciary, the court system, it's a way for him to basically sell justice to the highest bidder. And then we come to the bit that John is the most famous for, erroneously credited with sometimes, and that's Magna Carta. And where did I read this? It reads, if you actually read it, the Magna Carta as really a list of everything that John is doing wrong. It's I can't remember the phrase that was used now. But anyway, you can see that it's pointed towards John. I mean, one of the clauses is about to no one shall we sell blah 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 or justice. It's about the fact that he's selling justice to the highest bidder. And so the Magna Carta comes about because it really has just got to the point where John and his barons, or your noblemen, are at loggerheads. There's no the Magna Carta is almost a peace treaty, really. Now, charters of, this is my words, I've never heard a historian say this, but anyway, charters of behaviour are not unusual. I promise as your king to do this, 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 and this, protect this, and protect the church, normally is first, and but for one to be demanded from the king, but be written by his nobles, his barons, then this is why it's different. So this is the summer of 1215. The barons have risen up against him. They've got control of London. We'll talk about the French occupation as well quickly after this, because it's all sort of happens part and parcel of the same sort of thing. But Magna Carta is thrashed out between the barons and King John. King John is he's at Windsor Castle. The barons are they've got control of the city of London, and they meet at Runnymede, which is actually very close to Windsor. I've heard it said that it's in the middle. It's not the middle. It's basically still in Windsor. It's a very short journey. It's Runnymede actually supposed to be an ancient place of parley, and anyway, it's chosen. It's also a bit boggy, so it's supposed to not lend itself well to fighting. Yeah, so it begins with something called the Articles of the Barons, and you can still see this in the British Library. And sort of so you have this shuttle diplomacy. One list gets sent, it gets amended, it gets sent back, it gets amended and sent back, and so on. And you end up with this document that appears not to have been finished at the time where John has his seal added to it. And I think that is because John had enough. He'd lost patience, and he wasn't going to honour it anyway. So there was a clause that was unfinished, and this clause appointed a number of overseers who were able to say, "Oh, John has broken the terms of this charter." It was actually the Charter of Runnymede to begin with. Magna Carta, as a name, came later, and therefore we can sort of hold him to account. That though, that clause wasn't finished. So there's the fact that the clause that it wasn't finished that gives evidence that John had just had enough and decided to just finish these negotiations. But what's more telling is that he immediately petitions the Pope to have it annulled. And in fact, 70 days after the creation of Magna Carta, it is annulled by the Pope, Pope Innocent II. He declares it null and void of all validity forever, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it, what happens to it afterwards, and going over with the Pilgrim Fathers. And so it's probably provided the base of many constitutions. But anyway, because by this point, John will sell his soul. He has made a promise that he will take he takes the Crusaders' vow by this point, because he's in such trouble with his own nobles that he goes back to the Pope, makes up with the Pope, takes the Crusaders' vow. That means that the Pope is his protector as well as overlord of John's kingdom. So John basically gives away everything. And so that's how he gets this that's how he gets the Pope's backing at that point. Magna Carta is a whole thing on its own. In fact, I've got a video or two about Magna Carta that you can watch if you would like. But let's talk quickly about the French occupation, because by this point, 1216, Philip of France is the king. Now, his son is Prince Louis, heir to the throne, recognised heir to the French throne. And the barons of England invite him to come to England to take the land and to install him as king once they capture John and presumably put him to death. And so in May 1216, we actually do have a French invasion of England, albeit invited. I was trying to find a map. I really wanted to find a map for you. Maybe there's one. Maybe if I take a little bit longer to find one of just thought, I wonder if there's one in this book of England under in 1216, because the French under Prince Louis actually have control of a large amount of the country, almost half of England. It's not just a little bit, on the coast. No, there isn't one. Disappointed. Maybe I need to make one. Need to know a bit more about it first. But yeah, so you've got almost half of England in the control of the barons and Prince Louis, including London. And so this is the state of affairs. Oh, by the way, also the King of Scotland, by this point, King Alexander, pays homage to Louis in Dover, to Louis as the new King of England. So it looks really bad for John, and it looks like England is going to be once again taken in as part of the French Empire, probably the wrong word. It happened 200 years before. Why not again? And of course, the barons would have seen that this is happening on their terms. John, though, in 1216, so he is going around the country at incredible speeds. By the way, he could cover 30 miles a day, and then again, and then again, and then again. He really could cover ground very quickly. And it's during one of these. It's in 1216 that he's doing this, and he falls ill. He falls quite seriously ill. And maybe it's because of something he ate. Maybe it's from exhaustion. Maybe it's a mixture of the two. But this is when he famously loses, probably loses the crown or his crown. Maybe the crown jewels, maybe the lot. I don't know. The crown certainly doesn't apparently turn up in inventories after this time period, and this is when he decides to take a shortcut across the Wash. It's a tidal river, and his baggage, part of his baggage train, gets sucked into the sand. Horses are lost and men are lost and part of the baggage train. The chapel items, including holy relics, are lost, and his crown is lost. Apparently. So, and this illness that has grabbed John, he doesn't recover from. He's trying to still travel. Anyway, eventually he has to just decide he can't. And he's at Newark Castle, and he dies on the evening of the 18th, so today, over to the 19th of October. And like I say, there's these accounts that he ate peaches and new cider. He'd been ill for a few weeks, so either way, it was not a nice end, shall I put it that way? Although we've talked about probably worse things, but dysentery-like end anyway. No, I shouldn't say end, but yeah, death. So he's so he has a horrible death. It kind of like a fitting death, perhaps. And the Benedictine monk and chronicler Matthew of Paris writes, "Foul as it is, hell itself is made fouler by the presence of John." Now he lives after John, but this is the attitude toward John. So what happens next? Because England is in the middle of a civil war. The English barons have invited the French prince to come, basically treating him as King of England. He's got half the country, and now John, the centre of all this, all this reasoning to rise up and rebel, has gone, and he has heirs. His son Henry is 9 years old. He has another son called Richard as well, and so he's succeeded by his 9-year-old son Henry. And at this point, the reason for the Barons' uprising is sort of gone. It ebbs away, and Prince Louis loses support. But Henry III is crowned very swiftly at Gloucester Cathedral, or Gloucester Abbey then, dedicated to St Paul's. So also you could see it as St Paul's Abbey, Gloucester, if you see it written down. And he is crowned at, how come he's crowned at Gloucester Abbey. There's and he's also crowned with his mother, Isabella of Angoulême. Who's his mother? John's wife, second wife. He gets rid of his first one to marry his second one, but keeps all the inheritance from his first wife as well, by the way. So there's another nice thing. It also bared everyone's wives and daughters and sisters as well. He corrupted every sort of rule of how you are with anyone he came across, by the sound of it. So he's really but yeah, with his death, allegiances quickly turn, and they say, oh well, actually we've got 9-year-old Henry now, we're okay with that, and support, like I say, for Prince Louis of France sort of goes. That is, again, that's probably, and that's another story for another day, Henry III. He actually, though, just as an aside, I will tell you, he has a second coronation later at Westminster Abbey. So Westminster Abbey has been the scene of every coronation, or every monarch to have a coronation. It has been Westminster Abbey, but Henry III actually has his first coronation at Gloucester Abbey. John's body is taken all the way from Newark Castle to Worcester Cathedral. Now, John knows that he's dying at the very end, and he dictates a will. Now, I've seen this will, and anyone who is coming on the Rise of the Tudors tour next September 2024, will also see his will, because it's in Worcester Cathedral archives, which we're having a private tour of. And it's only short, it's only little. And in it, he says he would like to be buried at Worcester. And there's been the reason, yeah, there's been the reason given that it's the home of or the shrines of St. Wulstan and St. Oswald, I think it is, and that's why he wanted to be buried there. But also remember, I've just said, when he dies, the French prince has got hold a control of half of England. He can't go to a Westminster, or he this is, and he's lost all his lands in France. He can't be buried where his brother and mother and father are buried, at oh goodness, my French, Fontevraud. Anyway, he can't be buried there. He doesn't belong to him anymore. So he is buried at Worcester. And I think I mentioned his tomb a few weeks ago, and I have a mistake to correct, because John, he has, and this was typical of the era, a slab, and then his effigy was on the top, the oldest lifelike effigy in England of a monarch. And that would have been sat, I don't know, 10 inches off the floor, something like that. The slab with his effigy on top. When Prince Arthur Tudor was buried there in the early 16th century, he had a tomb chest. And at that point, the Tudors decided to give John a tomb chest as well. And it was assumed for a very long time that John's remains weren't actually in the place of his tomb chest and with his effigy on top, until I can't remember what year, 17 something, when they wanted to move it, because it is in front of the high altar, bang smack in front of the high altar, and it was considered in the way. Although I've seen other abbeys and cathedrals with the same idea, but anyway, they were going to move it, assuming that his remains weren't actually in there. And when they opened it up, they discovered that actually his remains were in there. And unfortunately, news got out that the king's remains were there, that he was, I wouldn't say he certainly wasn't intact. I mean, there was carcasses of maggots stuff around, goo. So his regalia was still there. You could tell. They measured him. Now, this is off the top of my head. Sorry, I haven't written this down. I think they measured him, and he was 5 foot. Well, you can Google this. It was shorter than I expected. It was something like 5'9", something like that. But because news had got around that you could come and now see the king, he had to be reburied fairly quickly. And actually, people had already taken souvenirs. And this is why, again, in Worcester Archives and on display in their library, if you have a private tour, like we're going to on the Rise of the Tudors next year, his thumb bone is in there. That's why it's there, because it was actually kept by a family whose descendant, in the end, gave it back to the cathedral. So, and that was the end of John. Like I said, with Henry II coming to the throne, people altered their loyalty and went to him. Again, this is wonderfully covered in The Greatest Night by Thomas Ashbridge, because William Marshall, who is this is the book about William Marshall. William Marshall is at Henry III's side, and it is under his and oh goodness, I can't remember. I never remember the other guy's name. There was 2 advisors that Henry III had, and under their guidance, but more than that, more hands-on than that, Magna Carta was reissued as a royal charter again. So remember, Magna Carta was basically a list of barons' demands. It was very telling of what John had been doing. You can kind of see what John must have been doing, because it was all, this won't happen, that won't happen. Oh, Amanda, thank you. 5'6.5" according to Google. Yeah, decently tall for the time. They say that, but he's actually his some of his forebearers, William, excuse me. I thought they were taller than that, but anyway. Yes, 5'6". I don't know. I wanted to say 5'6", and I thought, no, that sounds really too short. Yeah. Anyway, so remember, Magna Carta is this like list of almost admissions of what John's been like. Magna Carta, when it's reissued in 1217, is a royal charter. It's issued as from Henry III, with the advice of with the strong guiding hand of his advisors. And this is why Magna Carta actually survives, and why we know of it, why it survives long enough for the Pilgrim Fathers to take it over to America. Anyway, so it's really down to the fact that John dies, that we don't have another French, well, potentially, I mean, who knows what would have happened, but another French sort of invasion. And we end up with Magna Carta still intact, because John did the decent thing and popped off. So there you go. We've done over an hour. Thank you, everybody, for keeping with me for that. Maybe he got his height from his mum. So next week I'm going to be talking about, so I'm going somewhere tomorrow. It's a bit top secret at the moment, but I'm going somewhere tomorrow. So next week I will be telling you all about that. If you haven't already, then, and you're interested, of course, you can get your tickets for the Tudors Online History Festival, which I'm going through all the videos at the moment. So I will be able to share with you like little sound bites from them soon. So you can make your decision, if you haven't already, as to whether you want to attend. But the tickets are £20. I don't know where that is, whether that is in your currency. If you're a member of my Patreon, then you get 10% off those tickets. But we've got 7 speakers, and all 7 of those speakers will be at the live Q&A session, which we have on the final evening. That's Sunday, the 19th of November. If you can't make the weekend, which is 17th to 19th of November, and you can't make the live sessions, everyone with a ticket will have access to all of the talks and the recordings of the live sessions. So I think you'll really enjoy it. The talks are quite varied. I purposely invite the speakers, should I say? Invite them to speak on a topic that they're very interested in. So we have Tracy Borman talking about the relationship between Anne Boleyn and Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I, how they impacted on each other. It's really quite moving in places. Gareth Russell is talking about Edward VI's favourite, Barnaby Fitzpatrick, the rise, fall and rise of Barnaby Fitzpatrick. Very interesting, not just for the man, but the context of how this boy ends up being raised in the royal classroom alongside Prince Edward. What happens to him when Edward becomes king, and afterwards, and had Edward have lived, he would probably have been a name we would know as well as someone like a Charles Brandon. So we have Kat Marchant talking about Shakespeare versus the Puritans, very theatre led, if you're interested in that. Illyri Lynn is talking about Tudor fashion and how fashion is used in the court to demonstrate power, or also the changes in the fashion. Joanne Paul is talking about the women of the House of Dudley. So this is a brand new talk based on her book, The House of Dudley, but a new talk that from any she's done anywhere else, because she's focusing just on the women, and the women of the House of Dudley. If you've seen my interview with Joanne, you'll know this already. Is they were pivotal in in saving, actually, the literally physically saving sometimes the male members of their family, and certainly getting the family reputation and standing back. It's fascinating. So Joanne is talking about that. Estelle Perron is talking about Elizabeth I and Catherine de Medici, the search for a sort of mother-daughter relationship. Really interesting. And there's and so how could I forget James Clark talking about Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries. I could go on about the dissolution of the monasteries, honestly, everyone, you know by now. If you're interested, if you want to know why I'm smiling so much about that, please check out my series. It's James. James was doing all the talking. He's written a book, it's like this big, called The Dissolution of the Monasteries, A New History. He's a history professor at Exeter University. And there's a series that done on YouTube. He's done another talk about Henry VIII and the dissolution. You might not think there's enough to talk about. You will know that it will make perfect sense after you watch it. So all 7 of those people, or 7 of those incredible historians, will be joining us live for a Q&A at on the Sunday evening on the 19th of November. If you know you won't be able to make that live session, you can submit your question prior to the evening, and you can get those tickets at thetudors2023.eventbrite.co.uk. And like I said, they're £20. Manda has just done a quick calculation, $24.30 in the US. So there you go, as we speak. And like I say, if you're a patron, if you're a member of my Patreon, which you can be at patreon.com/British history, then you can get 10% off that ticket. Right, everyone, I don't know how you're feeling, but I hope you have a lovely day. I'm going to go off and have a drink because I'm all dehydrated now after speaking so long. If you're around tonight for History After Dark, we're beginning at the slightly later time of 8:30, and we're talking about the Bishops of Winchester and Crossbones ceremony. Oh, thank you, Clean. She just reminded me. The reading material, I'm just going to give you a reminder. So The Plantagenets by Dan Jones, I have that on Audible, so I don't have a book to show you. But King John, by Mark Morris, and one of my favourite books, The Greatest Knight, which is all about William Marshall, covers all sorts of things you didn't know, like the beginning of heraldry, how knighthood and chivalry developed, what they did before they jousts. I mean, you'll love it. Anyway, it's by Thomas Ashbridge. So maybe see you tonight for History After Dark, history.after.dark on Instagram, History After Dark on YouTube. Otherwise, I will see you next week, where I'll tell you all about the top secret place that I'm going to tomorrow. So hopefully I will see you next week. All right, everyone, take